It is that time. It is unprecedented. Many things that Dina Dahl, my colleague here, and I talked about last week have come to fruition, or the week before. Some quicker than I thought they would, but this Supreme Court's trying to get out of town. They've packed their bags. They're ready to go on summer vacation, and they've got like 20 or 30 opinions that they've got to drop one at a time, five at a time. And there's a whole bunch of new developments. I'm glad to be back behind the microphone with my colleague and dear friend, Dina Dahl, and shout out to the Mightiest Mighty and the Legal AFers who gave my family and me a lot of comfort and support with the loss of my mother last week. She was, as you would imagine, a huge supporter of everything that I do and I have been doing on the Midas Touch and Legal AF forever. She was there from the very beginning. I recorded an early episode of Legal AF. I'll have to find it somewhere with Ben, with her. And she was my, besides you, she was my sole audience, and tremendous loss, but it's made better knowing that I have this kind of loving community behind us. So let's get into unprecedented today, Dina. Charter schools, only 8 people heard the decision related to whether Oklahoma, at least, is going to be able to block funding religious schools, or religious organizations going to be permitted to operate charter schools or not with taxpayer dollars. Sounds wrong, even the way that I'm framing it. But the Supreme Court came out with a ruling, and it shouldn't be any surprise to people to follow unprecedented on a regular basis. But I will leave it at that until we get into that segment. Then we're going to talk about some other places where the Supreme Court has benefited the Trump administration, like concerning his decision to fire the heads of some independent agencies created by Congress, the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit Service Protection Board. And there was an administrative stay that was once in place. And the question up for grabs now was whether that stay to allow Donald Trump to fire the 2 heads, Kathy Harris and Gwen Wilcox, was going to be if they were going to stay fired during the course of their appeal, which could take a year or so, or they were going to be reinstated into the positions while the appeal was going on. And we have the ruling by the United States Supreme Court. We will cover it here on Unprecedented. Then we've got updates in the Alien Enemies Act. We've got a move to try to repeal it. That's a good move, although there's no votes for that, enough votes for that in Congress. But in the meantime, yet another federal judge, this time in Georgia, now our 5th judge. So it's 5-1 in favor of finding that Donald Trump unconstitutionally used the Alien Enemies Act. But we also have a Supreme Court decision that you and I touched on last week, just 6 days ago, a 7-2 decision against the Trump administration on the use of the Alien Enemies Act. And that got James Ho of the 5th Circuit all hot under the collar. He's trying out to replace Clarence Thomas or Alito, and he decided to take on the United States Supreme Court and chastise them. You would think this was written by Stephen Miller. It was so politically suffused with politics and dripping with sarcasm. But we'll talk about what was really going on there behind the scenes with Judge Ho. And we got some rulings about Venezuelans who are being deported under the temporary protective status laws and Donald Trump's actions, all right here on Unprecedented on the Legal AF YouTube channel, along with my dear colleague, Dina Dahl. Dina, thank you for helping while I was away for most of the week.
Oh, so glad to help. So sorry again about your mom, and sorry to your wife, Natasha and Francesca. And when I stepped in to help with Legal AF, all the audience comments were, so I feel like I'm like a voice to the audience comments, because everybody was outpouring of like how amazing your mom must have been, because they feel like you're such an example of a person with character and really leading the fight with this. And it's all about the moms. So,
my mom was a fighter. She was a Leo. She was a lioness, and she was a huge both of my parents were big Democrats and taught me values related to that. But my mom was always the moral and political compass for the family. And so a huge loss. But she did live to almost 90 and was able to see a lot of what we've accomplished here. And for that, I'm forever grateful, including the birth of my daughter and my marriage to Natasha and all that good stuff.
Well, on behalf of all the Legal AFers, we are really sorry, but we are very glad to have you back.
Yeah, and it's good to be back. Feels like a
Yeah.
warm embrace. Let's jump into charter.
Yeah.
Speaking of religion and faith, let's talk about the charter school, just to frame it, then I'll turn it over to you. Oklahoma and its Supreme Court made a decision, a year or so ago, that the federal funds going to a religious organization that ran a charter school was a violation of church and state, was a violation of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. There's always this battle with the right, MAGA right, about they only want to read the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. They never want to read the clause related to establishment. So in other words, they want to argue, we need to be able to freely exercise our religion. And to do that, we need your money. We need federal dollars to do that. And we always say, no, if you need federal dollars to do that, then that's the government establishing a religion. And that is the separation of church and state. But of course, this Supreme Court over the last 5-6 years has just, chipped away at is an understatement. Removed brick by brick the wall separating church and state. So there's basically one brick left. And now that was this case, that would be a proper sort of metaphor or analogy for what's happening here. So on the charter schools, we had an interesting lineup, right? Amy Coney Barrett recused herself because one of her best friends and goddaughter to one of her children, one of her 8 children, was an advisor at the University of Notre Dame to the actual church group that was bringing the case. And so, unlike Clarence Thomas and Alito, who would have thought nothing about sitting on the case, she decided, I'm not doing this. So it left us with a 4-4. It left us with an 8-person panel. And why don't you take it from there? And then what happened and what does it mean going forward based on the results, the split results?
Well, I think we can credit her ethical, decision-making basically for recusing herself, because it's up to them whether or not they recuse themselves. They don't have to give a reason. She didn't. She did the right thing here. So because it was a tie, there was no opinion. There was no precedent set. There was no, decision or analysis around whether or not taxpayer money can fund private charter schools, right? That question that was before the court can be brought again, right? There wasn't like precedent set because
there's no majority opinion because there was no majority.
Right. Because it was a tie, it just meant that the lower court ruling stood. So if the lower court ruling was in favor of taxpayer money and we'd had a tie, we'd be in a whole separate boat. But the irony here, and those who've been watching the show, the Oklahoma Supreme Court, right, and the Oklahoma Attorney General was all against funding these private Catholic schools. And so the irony is that the Oklahoma Supreme Court decision is the one that's standing, and that is the one that said no to funding it. So I guess we have Oklahoma to thank here. It's like, everything is like a topsy-turvy, but that's essentially what it is. We will see this come again, Popok, right? They're going to bring this up again in a different way with a different group that's not going to conflict out Justice Amy Coney Barrett. More, but that's okay. We're slowing this down.
Yeah. Look, here's the reality. Roberts switched over and voted with, it's obvious. Roberts did switch and think that, and this is interesting. Roberts switched, finding that this was a violation of the Establishment Clause. It was even a bridge too far for him because he's voted in favor of a lot of religion in public life, right. A lot. Prayer by football coaches at midfield and flags and playground equipment and you name it. He sided with it. COVID policies, that type of thing. But here, this was for him even a bridge too far. So he joined the what I call the moderate or the left-leaning wing of the United States Supreme Court, the Democratic wing of the Supreme Court, and that's how we got the 4. The other 4, of course, are Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas. The question is, what would Amy Coney Barrett have done? She is a Catholic. It is a big part of who she is. She was a law professor at the University of Notre Dame. That's hence the problem, the issue. She believes in children. She has a lot of them, including adopted ones. how this would have sided with her. Would she have gone establishment clause and sided with Roberts and the liberal wing, or would she have gone with free exercise clause and sided with the others? It's hard. It's hard to know. She has generally sided in favor of religion in public life. So if I was a betting person, I think 60-40, she would have ruled and the majority would have allowed this charter school. Now it's going to have to come back up. Not this case. It's over in Oklahoma for now. It doesn't set precedent as you've laid out, nothing. But in a year or two, depending upon who's still around on the Supreme Court, God forbid Judge Ho, after we talk about him later, a new panel, maybe the same panel, is going to have to talk about it. She's not going to recuse herself. They're not going to make that mistake again using the University of Notre Dame for anything. Because that was they were really kicking themselves that they didn't anticipate that she was going to recuse, because they didn't have to use that consultant at Notre Dame for the there's a lot of other schools out there that are Catholic and law schools. They didn't have to use her, but they did. So that's how it worked out. And we said, because you and I listened to that oral argument, right? You did a preview. You did a preview out of it. We did some post-game show. I had Leah Littman on from Strict Scrutiny. And listening to it, we said, I don't know, the best I think we can get here is 4-4, is Roberts coming over. And I didn't hold a lot of hope up for that. I thought it was 60-40. He wouldn't. But, he surprises me occasionally. Maybe when he thinks it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Maybe when he thinks it doesn't matter, he's going to go. It's like garbage time in a baseball game or a basketball game. He's like, it's not going to. I'll just side with them 4-4.
I think he's all about incremental changes for the most part. It's why he cited to save Obamacare, don't you think? Because after doing Citizens United, everybody was so up in uproar. He knew that if they also voted against Obamacare, there'd be like an outcry against the Supreme Court. I think he did this. Probably not for any like legal philosophical reason, but trying to kind of save the court. Every time it goes out on a limb, he maybe tries to take it back a little bit because he's trying to not destroy the court, essentially. And it is a good question about Justice Amy Coney Barrett, because I think what she does is look at the case on the facts and the law, this is why she's revolutionary, right? Because we have like Alito and Thomas, like Kavanaugh, like you can just, how they're going to rule just based on, is it about religion or is it about Trump, right? But she tends to really delve more into it. So it might depend on how good of a case it is. So she is harder to predict, but I think you're right. She was appointed to that position because she was going to be pro-Christian nationalist, but she does surprise us. So
yeah. So we'll see, but it's probably 2 years away. The reality, just to put a line under it, 4-4, no precedential value. Oklahoma, it affects Oklahoma because they're not going to be able to get this charter school up and running because there weren't enough votes to do that. It doesn't have any, we won't be able to cite to the case for any other purpose. And I'm sure the alt-right wing Christian right is going to find another case that doesn't have an Amy Coney Barrett problem and just try to lobby Amy Coney Barrett in many ways, including ad dollars and different ways that you lobby to try to pressure her into ruling in their favor and allowing religious charter schools. We'll continue to follow it.
Well, just like one quick note on that. I think, though, that the oral argument gave a roadmap to people who do not want to fund religious charter schools, because they made a really good point of the fact that the board that oversaw the schools and over in Oklahoma didn't have any public officials on it. And that was kind of like the linchpin for why they argued that charter schools were not government. And in California, they do have public officials on charter schools. So states kind of have a roadmap. Those who, and it seemed like Oklahoma was actually one of them, those that don't want public taxpayer funding to go to charter schools, start stacking those boards with public officials, and they've eliminated that little loophole that seemed very important to the justices. So in a way, it may have backfired this movement because it announced to all the states where they were going to take this.
How to fix it. That's one of the reasons that we And we will continue when the new session opens in October. First Monday in October is our start of the next term of the Supreme Court. We will continue this new thing that we started here on Legal AF to make it the home for all things law and politics, which is that we had the live stream of the audio. There's no video at the Supreme Court of the oral arguments. I mean, not every one. There's 60 or 70 oral arguments, but the key ones we'll do about 10 or 12 a year. Now, could there be, so what happens, just to give people, as we move into our next segment, what happens now, the old term, we're starting to get the last of the opinions. There, some of which have been written, some of which are about to be written. They just argued the oral argument on this like 3 weeks ago, and we already have it, and we already have a decision. So they went very quickly with that because they're trying to wrap up. They're behind because of the 13, 14, 15 emergency applications by the Trump administration in getting their work done. So we'll get those. You and I will be able to talk about 20 more decisions over the course of the summer. And then there'll be, I'm sure, a number of maybe 4 or 5 emergency applications over this summer. Most of which do not get oral argument, but we will be talking about them in depth when they're briefed. There could be, I could see some really momentous issue where they decide they need an oral argument. It's not like they've never had an oral argument. They had oral argument for Bush versus Gore, when they're trying to decide a president. So they control, as you said earlier, they control their own docket. They control their own rules. They want, so we might have an oral argument over the summer, but if we get through the summer with those emergency applications and kind of giving a viewing guide here for the summer on Supreme Court practice, then we'll be sort of in a little bit of a trough after all that comes out in Supreme Court world until the first Monday in October. We'll be able to talk in advance probably around September. You and I will talk about the cases that are coming up. There'll be 10 or 12 cases that we need to keep a close eye on when they're going to be argued, what they've decided to that interests them and when they're scheduled for. And then they hold those oral arguments from the first Monday in October until the end of April, beginning of May-ish, and then start issuing their opinions. And we're back and rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, and repeat, right? Why don't we switch gears and talk about, you and I covered pretty heavily, and now we have at least a temporary result in the National Labor Relations Board. So you have 2 entities that came out of labor strife in the 1930s and so in the United States to protect both federal workers and just unionized workers. One is the National Labor Relations Board. If you're interested to know historically, like what I meant by labor strife, like go rent a movie about Jimmy Hoffa or any of the, during that era. I think Sylvester Stallone made a terrible version of it. I forget what it was. Fist. I think it was called Fist. F-I-S-T. But it was really the story of Jimmy Hoffa, but Stallone played it.
Okay.
Or watch those. You'll know how bad union members and people wanting to be unionized were treated violently, murderously in America. And that led to the formation of the National Labor Relations Board. And then there's something at the federal workers level called the Merit Service Protection Board, because federal workers were getting screwed too. And they were created by Congress. They were bipartisan. They were executive agencies, but they were born from Congress. And the question is, even though they were born from Congress, and because they're executive branch agencies, does that mean whoever occupies the presidency can terminate them, defund them, restructure them, eliminate them, and fire all of its members and its head? And Donald Trump, of course, tried all that. And now we've got lower level federal courts said you went too far. There's a 1935 or so Supreme Court case called Humphreys Exeutor, named after a case. And it says that if you have an administrative panel created from a bipartisan Congress, yes, it's an executive branch, but as long as it's just mainly administrative and does some quasi-judicial things, it's not really exercising executive power, then there's a limit on how the president can remove the people on that board and the heads. It has to be basically for cause. It has to be for, malfeasance or something that's and that's not what Donald Trump did. Donald Trump was just like, oh, I don't like the color of your party or skin. And so Gwen Wilcox out, first African-American head of the National Labor Relations Board. And the same thing for Kathy Harris. Now, let me turn it to you, but let me just say one thing.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, this is Popok prediction time. We should have a graphic for Popok predictions.
Yeah, we should. I like
Popok
that.
predictions. Bing. Like a little, I don't know what would come out. A little cartoon.
Like a running game. Like what happens if you get it or you lose it?
Yeah,
like
something would come out.
we got to do a whole thing.
Brian, work on an animation. Popok predictions. Bing. Here we go. He's never going to fill those 2 spots because without them, there's no majority. Without a majority, he has completely put them on ice. Those 2 organizations, meaning unions. Okay, unions who voted for Trump just lost their watchdog that protected them in the National Labor Relations Board. Good work not supporting Kamala Harris properly. Well, we'll have to find out. We'll see who's better for labor. Yeah, I know who's better for labor. And then on the Merit Service Protection Board, same thing. We don't need a merit. There's no obligation the court's not going to force him to fill those spots. So why don't you talk about what the Supreme Court did?
Yeah. And just to pick that up, I mean, because Congress created these boards under the statute, a president can only fire with cause, and they don't have a quorum now that he has fired the people. So that's why they can't meet and govern. So that's such a great point that he basically that's his way of dismantling it without dismantling it. So the order, I mean, as we know, there's the Humphreys executive decision. Chief Justice Roberts wrote an opinion back in the early 2000s that allowed the president to fire the single head. That was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the single head. And Chief Justice Roberts wrote in there that, okay, the president can do it when there's just one person, but when it's a multiple board member, he can't. And this exact example is a multiple board member. This is an example of Chief Justice Roberts likes to overturn laws incrementally. And he did it a little bit, and we're going to see him kind of go back on his own decision, I think. But for now, this is, again, a procedural. They're not looking at the substance. But so in their order, the order allowing him to fire him, they say, well, this is, Article 2 power of the president. And the harm of limiting the Article 2 power is basically greater than firing these people. And so we should allow him to fire these people. There's not much of a harm. They can always, this is their wording, Popok, they can always get rehired. There's not a harm in that. The real harm is encroaching on this presidential power, completely not even looking at your issue of the fact that you've now had millions of Americans not have oversight as Congress has intended, but this is their reasoning. Interestingly, they point out in the order that the Federal Reserve chair cannot be fired by Trump, right? This is interesting.
Now, why do you think they took time out and spilled ink on that issue?
Because they care about their stocks. Republicans are so predictable. It's like, oh, union members, throw them under the bus. But my 401k stock market, you're not going to touch that.
Because Donald Trump, if he gets his greasy little thumbs on Jay Powell, and people, I said this with, I think I said it on the last, my legal AF I did with Ben. People should, whether you pray or don't pray, you should pray to keep Jay Powell like he doesn't retire. And
seriously.
say, because the only thing that is tethering our economy to planet Earth, the only thing that's connecting it is his stewardship of the Federal Reserve. And if Donald Trump gets his greasy little hands on it, we're screwed. That's the second major organization in a week, though, that has warned Donald Trump and told him, you're not firing Jay Powell. That's this one. And then last week, not Fitch, but Moody's, the major rating agency, downgrading the U.S. debt from first time since 1917 from AAA rated, right, which basically lowered the credit score for the United States to one below that, and said in it, we don't see a need to lower this rating again, as long as the independence of the Federal Reserve is not challenged. I was like, talk about putting a ring fence around Jay Powell.
Seriously.
They're circling the wagons.
They're circling the wagons. Yeah. For the Supreme Court, literally did not need to mention it at all. And they do not, and they choose their words very carefully. And there must be even more chatter behind the scenes, right, Popok, than we are even hearing that fact that everyone is so afraid of that happening is scary, because not only is Powell like obviously the most experienced person ever, but he gives a sense of like there's at least an adult in the room in charge. So yeah. So anyway, so the Supreme Court said basically, go ahead. There's Article 2 power with these unions, but not Jerome Powell. Now the three dissenters was Kagan, Sotomayor, and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, which is no surprise. And their point was, wait a second here. Like we are not doing anything substantive here. This is a shadow emergency docket thing. This is just about, do we lift a stay, right? Or keep the stay? And when we are doing something so procedural, we should be following established law. And the Humphreys Exeutor established law is that a president cannot fire a board member. And so that should be all we do, is stick with our precedent. You are saying, majority, that you're not looking at the substantive issue, but your actions are in effect changing our entire precedent on this shadow emergency docket, which I thought was like a fabulous point. I mean, obviously, sadly, it didn't convince enough people to make a difference, but that really is, like we talk a lot about the Supreme Court and the effects of the Supreme Court and the downside to the shadow emergency docket. But here they are. You have decades of precedent that they're essentially changing with no reasoning, not much of an opinion, and they get to couch it as, oh, we're not doing anything. This is just procedural. And so I'm glad they at least called them out on that.
Yeah. I mean, Roberts and the majority was like, well, there's more harm to having fired people occupy a position than there is in having those fired people get their jobs back if we're wrong. I was like, okay. In the meantime, there's no recognition of the reality, which is he's never going to fill these positions, and he just put out of business. They should have made a bigger argument about this. He just put out of business these two organizations for the duration of his term or through the appeal, and that's what's going to happen. Well, let's move on to all things Alien Enemies Act. That's still going on.
Yeah,
even though I was away, that's still happening, and got a new ruling from a Georgia judge, consistent with what we saw in the Eastern District and the Northern District of Texas, and in Colorado and in New York, and so that's the only outlier is a judge in Pennsylvania. And the Supreme Court, though, made a ruling we should touch on. I did a hot take on it at kind of around the time, but we got a 7-2 decision that's popped up against Donald Trump, and then that got the attention of Judge Ho. Why don't you kind of walk our audience through that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they really reaffirmed. I mean, so far the Supreme Court has been consistent with what they've said with the Aliens Enemies Act, which is, well, they're again still not looking at the substance, but you can't deport people under this right now. And that was the 7-2 decision. As we know, Alito and Thomas dissented. Good news. I mean, we see still people being deported or attempt to be deported to South Sudan. There's still crazy stuff going on, but this use of the Aliens Enemies Act is being paused under the Supreme Court. Judge Ho, as you have mentioned, Popok, in an earlier episode, that he is auditioning. And so I thought it was pretty awesome that he came out with like a campaign statement, basically. Like, how predictable are you going to be, people?
Yeah, he out magged. He was like, I'm not even sure Clarence Thomas would have written as strident an attack and defense of Donald Trump as Judge Ho. By the way, for no reason, I'm just going to say what happened. You when you get there, and I'll do the whole thing. You'll get into the nitty gritty. But the Supreme Court sends back with instructions to the Fifth Circuit and tells them, you got it wrong. You should have granted the injunction. You shouldn't have let the planes fly to Venezuela and fly these people away from federal jurisdiction. You should have grounded the planes so we can get a hand. Why are we being stampeded into making decisions while people are in flight? Stop the flights. Let the Supreme Court, let this come up through proper channels. The Supreme Court, why are you turning us? This was the Supreme Court was getting pissed too. Why are you turning us into a lower level trial court? How dare you? There was a little bit of umbrage taken in the Supreme Court decision too. And that got, I guess, Judge Ho all fired up. So he sent it back. So all the Fifth Circuit did, including Ho, was to issue an administrative order that they're not even handling the decision. They said this should be assigned to another randomly selected 3-judge panel. We're done to follow the instructions of the Supreme Court. That's all that should have said. Mm-hmm. One line. We're not handling it. Some other panel is going to handle it. Good night, everybody. But that's not what Judge Ho did.
No, he kind of reiterated, right, that the Supreme Court went too far. He kind of even alluded to Trump. The president is being, unfairly ruled against. I mean, it was definitely Justice Thomas, please resign. I'm ready for your position. I don't even know if his opinion was targeted so much to Trump or Thomas, because nothing will happen if Thomas doesn't step down first. But it is so unusual, especially in a 7-2 position. I mean, this is a very strong position for the Supreme Court to take, for a lower court, even an appellate court judge, to kind of be so rude in his language toward the Supreme Court, or so, I guess you could say, rebellious in the language. This would not have happened pre-Trump, ever. And I think this is, I suppose, how now these MAGA judges think they're going to get their jobs, right? But that was a development to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two people trying out at the Fifth Circuit. Andrew Oldham, who is as terrifying as Ho in his own way. But he's got another cross to bear, considering we're talking about religion today, because he's like a white guy. Oh. Ho is at least Asian or Pacific American or whatever it is. So, but that never stopped Trump. Trump doesn't care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. He would have all white men if he could, right?
He would.
So those two have been trying out. I would be shocked if Donald Trump gets another opening, like Thomas or Alito in the next term, decide, I'm going to let Trump get my seat. Mm-hmm. If he didn't pick from the Fifth Circuit. I mean, that whole circuit is like trying out. And it was ridiculous. It was and he got all under the collar and and the Supreme Court obviously favored clients like Tren de Aragua. Right, the Supreme Court's favoring a narco-terrorist gang from Venezuela, and they were rude to Judge Hendricks in Texas and to the Fifth. Because I said it early on. If you read between the lines, the Supreme Court was pissed at the Fifth Circuit. It was pissed at Hendricks, and was pissed that they were being dragged in to issue orders at their lofty level. It was it was almost like, this is so beneath us that we have to issue this effing injunction because you guys didn't do your job. Because you guys didn't. And Ho was like, well, wait a minute. You're disrespectful to the president. By the way, no mention by Ho at all about the lack of notice, the lack of time, due process, squiring these people away in the middle of the night to avoid federal jurisdiction. Lack of due process. None of this mattered to him. It was only the what do I call it? The clutching of the pearls and the heaven to Betsy. Are you effing kidding me? Are you really? So, all right, that was Ho's tryout. Yeah. But why don't you touch at the end here on the Venezuelans and the TPS and what we got a new ruling out of that as well that we can end on.
So as we know, Kristi Noem moved to basically cancel the temporary protective status of about 350,000 Venezuelans. So groups went in to stop that, to say the way she was doing it was discriminatory, a pretext, again, not following process, not following law. This went all the way up to the Supreme Court because the lower court agreed, I'm not going to allow you to deport them until we find out whether or not you can legally cancel them this way. And sadly, the Supreme Court said, oh, no, we're allowing you to go ahead and deport them while we still figure out whether or not you can legally deport them. So again, this was procedural, not substantive. Nobody has gone to the matter of whether or not they can legally deport them. But talk about very real consequences for people, because these people have legal status. Trump campaigned on getting rid of illegal immigration. These people are here legally. They went through a really difficult, time-consuming legal process to get this status that is being canceled. And, if they get deported and then they get decided months, a year later that it was illegal, I mean, good luck with that. I don't know if they can ever come back. So the very real consequence is Trump is getting his way. And it's not going to end with Venezuela. As we know, they are planning on canceling the temporary protected status, or already have, for Afghanistan's that helped during, like interpreters and others that helped the military. They're canceling Haitians under the temporary protective status. So this is just the beginning. Again, Trump, as he's bringing in, right, white Afrikaners, is getting rid of people who are here legally, people of color that are here legally, and the Supreme Court isn't stopping him. So again, the Supreme Court is like such a mixed bag these days, right? Because, we're like happy one day and then we're like, no, you didn't, because good for them on the Aliens Enemies Act. But like, really, you're allowing them to get deported without even knowing if they can legally. So it's tough. It's tough to cover them today because, one day I'm happy with their decision, and the other day I totally disagree.
Yeah, and we're watching. This is the struggle. The only thing that keeps us honest is Sotomayor, Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, who wrote a long decision against the ruling, pointing out the hypocrisy, pointing out the inconsistency in the analysis. And there's going to be other cases. Look, we just had a federal judge that was like, no, you can't send to the unstable nation of the Sudan a group of people who are not Sudanese because their home countries wouldn't take them back. No, you can't send Cubans and Mexicans to the Sudan, which the State Department declares is an unstable region. It's just crazy. And eventually somebody's going to bring up an argument, this is cruel and unusual punishment and violates the Eighth Amendment, because I don't think you can export your justice system to a third world country and just turn a blind eye and go, well, I wonder what happened to that guy. I mean, Trump has set up like a trap door system, just like, and that they just disappear. Like, I don't know what happened to him. I can't get him back. Lord knows where they went. It's like, I'm sorry, that is not I did not sign up for, right, offloading or delegating to third world and second world countries that don't share our values, the tail end of our justice or immigration system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we'll take it, we'll get you to the 5-yard line and then we're sending you to Cuba or Russia or North Korea. Like, what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And why the Supreme Court isn't more up in arms about this?
Yeah.
If you take it from a big picture standpoint, I have no blessed idea. I don't know how you can, it just so undermines the ideals of our constitutional republic at every level. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm sorry, I don't want to live in a country where it's okay to send people to a gulag that's run by people that are not Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And if you thought, just do it here. Send them to just build a supermax. I don't know why Donald Trump's having so many problems with this. Yeah. All of his friends that contributed to his campaign are in the private prison business. Okay. This whole thing that we reported on Legal AF about, a congresswoman who just got arrested and charged with a felony related to her, trying to oversee the new detention center for immigrants that was opened up in Newark, New Jersey. That's run by a private prison company that donated heavily to Donald Trump. Okay. So just give your buddies who gave you money, give them the clients that they want, the inventory that they want, and just put everybody in supermax, but keep them in the United States. So if we ever need to pop them out for a federal court appearance, they're over here.
But the problem is they haven't committed a crime that would sentence them to a supermax.
Right? Details, schmetails.
But that's the problem, is they have created somebody crossing into our border, having a life sentence in a prison in El Salvador. Nowhere in our law is that the punishment or consequence, right? So, well, there's so many levels.
We're going to get them all back. The good news is, if you weren't motivated to get off the couch and register to vote and vote for, give us the House and the Senate back. That'll start the process of having checks and balances. Whether impeachment and conviction happens, people know my opinion about that. But at the very least, we will have a more well-balanced government, and we'll start putting an end to a lawless rogue president as we move into a 2028. And if the White House is taken by the Democrats, there were 120 executive orders in the first 100 days and 50 on the first day. We're going to have 50 or 100 on the first day. And one of them is we're bringing all these people back. Well, maybe not all of them,
right,
but a lot of them are coming back.
Yeah. And on that point, I'm a delegate to the California Democratic Party, and we have our convention next weekend, and candidates are well out there already, organizing, talking to groups, campaigning. We are already starting the primaries. So if you are in your areas, reach out to your Democratic groups and clubs and whatever. The primaries, in terms of the political sense, are here. They are here. Candidates are already starting the groundwork. And I am going to, there's some groups that I get involved with in terms of volunteer opportunities throughout the country. And I'm going to try to get some that we can, very concrete ideals, share with our audience. But just in the meantime, we may think the midterms are so far away, but they're here. Choosing the candidates are so important right now, even within the Democratic Party. Well, go and see who's running in your area.
Well, that's the point. And people always ask me, and I'm sure they do to you also in chat and otherwise, Popok, what can we do? We're telling you what to do. You have to. I assure you that if you think you have resolved if you're a mail-in ballot type of person, you've resolved and are properly registered for mail-in, and you live in a red state especially, I assure you, you have to go and re-register. And there's deadlines related to that. Don't assume that what you did before, even a year ago, is still, they've tried to pull the tablecloth off the table and the rug out from under you so many times you can't even keep track. Just make sure you spend the time, spend a few hours now, so you're not up against the deadlines for voting, to get your registration right. That and street protests and phone calls and letters to congressmen and senators to put pressure on them, and putting pressure on them in town hall meetings, should they hold any, and pressuring their constituent services offices and that type of thing. And then be part of the fellowship here that we've established on Legal AF, your one-stop shopping for all things law and politics on the Legal AF YouTube channel. Take a minute, hit the subscribe button, especially if you like. Here's a way to vote. You take a receipt with you. If you like Unprecedented and you like what we're doing, even if you only like Dina, hit the subscribe button. Free. And that helps. And why? Why is it? It's not ego. It's not ego. It's algorithm. The bigger we get, the more successful we get, more subscribers we get, the more I can attract additional talent, bolt them on here, and we become a very attractive home for lots of other contributors. So I told Dina before we got on the air today, just today, we've brought on our next two dynamic duo in Asha Ragappa and Renato Mariotti, who have a great podcast called It's Complicated. When I started that, it sounded like an Abbott and Costello joke, like, oh, tell me what your new show is. Well, it's complicated. No, tell me. No, that's the name of the show. Yeah. So they're going to be once a week with us, but then Asha's going to do her own Ask Asha hot takes with us here. She's a Yale professor in national security, former FBI agent. He's a former federal FBI agent as well, but also a very good white collar lawyer. And just 3 weeks ago, we added Sean Wilentz and Sidney Blumenthal to, exclusively to, with Court of History to be our in-house ethics experts and put everything, historical experts to put everything the Trump administration is doing into historical context. And for those that are like, don't I know Sidney Blumenthal? Yeah, he was the close advisor to the Clintons and was in the White House, wrote for a lot of organizations, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, and has a 3-volume set about Abraham Lincoln. Look at this, Sidney.
Wow.
I'm selling your books. This is my summer reading.
Is it on Kindle? Is it on the Kindle?
Yes, and he's working on his 4th. I said, what are you working on these days, Sidney, when he joined? He says, I'm working on the 4th. I said, the 4th volume? Wow. I said, how does it end? Don't tell me. About Abraham Lincoln? I can only guess. So, but look at this group. It was literally like 7 months ago. It was like you and me.
It's true.
It was you and me.
It's you and me.
It was like, I was going to do more. I was like, you, me. Nope, it was you and me. And then
That's
we
funny.
added, Karen was there, but she's busy doing
That's
trial
true.
work right now. And then we brought in court accountability action, and they joined. And then Shan Wu joined. And then we got Dave Arenberg and Melva Pearson a couple of months ago, Sean Walentz and Cindy Blumenthal, and now Asha and Renato. It's fantastic. It's all because of you. We do it for you. Otherwise, we'd just be talking to each other.
Yeah.
But we appreciate it. Take a moment, hit the subscribe button here. We have a new Substack for all things legal AF. If you can't get enough, we already have 60,000 subscribers. We're only 3 weeks old. And that's a testament. The contributors here do work there. I do a lot of work there. I got a morning briefing called Morning AF. All the filings of things we're talking about right here on Unprecedented, all of them, you can find on the Substack under Filings AF.
That's great. Those are so hard to find. They're hard to find.
Supreme Court, SCOTUS AF. You see where we're going with this?
Yeah. Awesome.
So come over to the Substack for Legal AF as well. So until our next Unprecedented next week, I got Dina Dahl and Michael Popok here. Shout out to the Midas Mighty and the Legal AFers. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.